Pleased to introduce our next speaker, Jeffrey Duerk from Case Western University. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And in particular, I would like to thank Barbara and Ruben for setting me up so nicely to talk really about a component of academia that Ruben just touched on a little bit, and that is sort of faculty my age and a little bit younger, and really the opportunity we have to look at new models of industry and academic collaboration. Now, if I think of sort of what was industry-academic collaboration from, I would say, 1880 to 1980, it was largely a result of industry philanthropists and personal relationship with university presidents. This is John Rockefeller and William Rainey Harper that gave rise to, the relationship between those two gave rise in Rockefeller committing funds that established the University of Chicago. And it was that personal relationship, as well as the philanthropic mission, that essentially the CEO felt to support institutions in the region. But of course, as we all know, that sort of model doesn't exist today. But yet we all benefited from that. If I just walk across my campus, there are two buildings. For example, the Strosacker building was funded essentially by the family of one of the two founders of the Dow Chemical Company. The second building, the A.W. Smith building, was a result of Lubrizol, which was the sons of the founders of Dow Chemical Company. And if you went to any campus in the United States, you would see buildings like this. I'll point out just to the left of the building on the left is the Rockefeller building on our campus. And so they're everywhere. But from 1880 to 1980, I would really sort of call this the handout model as opposed to anything else. And while universities were not necessarily begging per se, it was sort of a one-way transactional relationship. And what I want to talk about a little bit is the evolution of university corporate relations from where we were years ago, this sort of singular interaction, to sort of a targeted engagement that sort of existed probably around 1980 to 2000 or so. Now, what happened in 1980, and you heard Robert Duncan talking about this, sometime in the 80s or somewhere in that period of time, industry started to de-invest in their own internal research program and shift some of their research to us in academia. And we really benefited from that, and part of the reason for that was the result of the Bayh-Dole Act that gave us as universities the opportunities to commercialize our discoveries. And that was a really exciting time because we in universities had a backlog, if you will, of technologies that were sitting there, and we had this opportunity now to capitalize on this vacuum that was beginning to exist in industry. So it was really exciting. We had this opportunity, we had this backlog of technology, and from my perspective, this is when I came into academia. I had worked in industry between my bachelor's and master's, between my master's and PhD, and then after my PhD. So I understood things like milestones, timelines, and deliverables, and yet most of my faculty colleagues sort of didn't get that. So this is a result of, at Case Western Reserve, and I'm just going to use us as an example, this is a result of sort of that Bayh-Dole era funding and what happened to us sort of from 1980 to up till 2010 or so. Our revenues from licensing agreements were going up. That backlog of technology was getting licensed. Our tech transfer offices went from one person who was responsible for all grants and contracts and invention disclosures and patents and everything like to a whole plethora of people that were largely focusing on taking that backload and licensing it out. And yet that Bayh-Dole era unwound, and essentially what happened was all of those patents that we had sitting on the shelf sort of ended up running out of their useful lifetime, and our tech transfer office and our faculty and others were not engaging in useful long-term sustainable relationships. So this era that existed, I would say, from 1980 to 2000 was essentially insufficient. There was not a sufficient amount of intellectual property being developed. There was no broader set of academic industry relationships. And our focus on academia really had to change. So if you look at the way things are today, what we're trying to do, and many others are sort of facing this same thing, is moving away from a tech transfer office as a licensing agent and really have our corporate relations office be the group that's responsible for establishing long-term strategic partnerships with industry where our expertise at the faculty level, both mid-level, junior level, and senior level, really map to the appropriate business and partners, not just in the US, but worldwide. And that really is a result of what we talked about before, and that is part of this shifting of research and development into academia and out of industry. But it really represents what I would say is sort of the handshake model that we've merged into. Now, if I look at sort of how we've gone about this, we've recognized that there's at least 4 different types of interaction that we want to have. One is in the area of research, one is in the area of human capital, that is just the people that these companies are going to file or hire. In some cases, it may be related to marketing and visibility, and each of these different companies has a little bit different relationship with us. In the case of Saint-Gobain, it's a material science company. They essentially outsource their corporate research, part of their corporate research, into our university. They fund specifically 3 or 4 projects a year for our faculty to work on with their scientists on our campus. In the case of KeyBank, it's a footprint across 20 different states, and they're specifically looking to us to train their next generation of employees. Eaton is an engineering company, and while we have relationships in engineering, one of their core values is ethics. And so they support, for example, our Intermori Ethics Prize that's given out nationally. And by co-branding with us, they get the marketing and visibility that they want that's sort of related to their core values. And Medtronic's an interesting one because it started out in research and has given rise to philanthropy as well. And it sort of goes back and forth. This is very much an oscillating relationship where right now, in addition to the research projects, Medtronic supports graduate student fellowships for minority students on our campus. Now, to do all this, it really required us to completely change the business model for how our university works. Instead of having separate offices for corporate relations and tech transfer and grants and research and contracts, grants and contracts, essentially these people all work together. They all sit in the same room. They all go over grants and contracts and proposals together. They all negotiate the terms together. And essentially in a period of just a few weeks, basically contracts are turned back to our industry partners. We actually show that based on data that our time of actually having a contract in hand is 4 times less than our industry partners. We're very rapid in turnaround because all of these different stakeholders that were previously scattered throughout the university are looking at these things together. So what's the impact of that? If you look at the interactions then as far as training our faculty as well as having a broader corporate relations perspective, we recognize that things we have to have is a pipeline of technology that's coming from our faculty and our students. These are our invention disclosures going up. The number of transactions, that's what precedes actually any kind of income is going up, and the breadth of the relationships that give rise to transactions is going up as well, because our corporate relations recognizes that, you know, it's a contact sport. They have to be calling people and doing things on a strategic basis. Now, that doesn't mean that other things are being sacrificed for that. If you look at, for example, the purple range, that's the philanthropic, or that's the research grant area, and you can see that that bar in the lower graph is actually increasing over years. We're getting more sponsored research, and which is exactly what you would hope we would achieve. The overall level of philanthropy is essentially staying constant. So that mission and that interaction has not changed over years, but it's largely coming now as a result of our long-term commitment and impact on the companies as opposed to a civic engagement role only. So these philanthropic funds come at the back end of a relationship, not at the front end. Now if I have time, I want to spend just a couple seconds talking about 4 different companies and the relationships we have with them. Parker Hannifin has, for example, a master research agreement where all of the deal terms have been pre-negotiated. And the only thing we do need to take on a new project is essentially a statement of work and a budget. Everything has already been approved. In the case of Atotech, this was a relationship in which a single faculty member held a relationship with the company and a single sponsored project for about 10 years. By creation of a master research project, that funding with that corporation has gone up to over $1 million a year, and they've relocated some of their staff onto our campus and has renovated labs in some of our buildings. In UL, as all of you know, they're interested in fire and materials and the interaction of electronics in the fire space. A long-term master research agreement with them gave rise to a new undergraduate graduate degree program and $1 million of research funding as well. In the Parker Hannifin case, I'll also point out the fact that in addition to a master research agreement, they have now endowed 2 chairs on our campus. Again, the philanthropy followed the relationship as opposed to preceding it. And I want to give a particular shout out to Siemens Medical Systems. They were the first company about 30 years ago who ventured into this space of creating a master research agreement. Over the 30 years at Case, the average research funding is approximately $300,000 a year. Every 5 years, a new MRI system is given to the university. The funding comes from their corporate research and development programs in Germany, and our faculty are engaged in their product development cycle, defining what the next systems will look like 10 years in the future. This is a very successful collaboration. Now, the benefits to us are innumerable. It gives rise to completely different streams of research funding, and as you heard from Ruben and Barbara, it sort of creates a different types of interaction and mindset among our faculty. It creates different avenues for us to place our students and our talent. It allows us to have our faculty and others engaged in providing access to unique research resources that the companies otherwise wouldn't have access to. And it really, I think, gives our faculty a sense of, and we heard this before, real-world problems for our faculty to understand the difference between invention, which is something you make, and innovation, which is something people will buy. And having that connection in our faculty's mind, understanding of the difference, I think is really important. I think, of course, there's benefits to our partner. In addition to having access to human capital, it also gives rise to completely different types of relationships. These are just some of the companies that are now engaged in us at Case Western Reserve. But if I look back and say that we moved from this case of handouts to the buy-dole era to handshake, it's natural to sort of ask what's next. As you heard Barbara and Ruben talk about, these innovation centers on our campuses are absolutely unbelievable. And there's certainly a nidus of activity that we see between our faculty, our industry partners, and our students to really create two completely different kinds of relationships. In this case, this is our 49,000 square foot think box. It's probably the largest design and innovation space on a college campus. But it really brings us the opportunity to put together a completely different kind of collaboration. Not just one where the companies are embedded on our campus working directly with our faculty and students, but ones where we can, for example, also look at different types of collaborations involving multi-investigators at multiple universities from around the world. And this is just one example of a project that we're working on that involves universities and companies in India, in Taiwan, and throughout the United States. We're being asked to put these teams together. We're being asked to do more than just provide our resources in terms of our intellectual capital and our research resources, but also to help them form the teams that are going to solve their particular problems. So it's really, I think you would agree that this industry-academic collaborations has really been an evolution over the last 180 years or so, or 100 years or so. But the pipeline essentially focuses on talent, resources, collaboration, and mapping, finding the right partners, engaging them in the right way, and showing them that we can be responsive and add value to their projects. It's given rise to completely different types of relationships and better alignment between us and the university. And for those of you who are actually in industry, what I would say, this is a buyer's market for you. With the uncertainty that exists in the federal research marketplace, faculty are particularly attentive and interested in looking at broadening the types of research resources that are available to them and learning a completely different lexicon and processes in which to interact. So thank you very much for your time.